here's something. When my kids got old enough to drive, I didn't give them really tight curfews. You got to be home by X. I told them when they had to leave for home, and that comes from my own personal experience. I'm blaming my driving on the fact that my father gave me curfews. And I was suffering from 5-minute-itis. In other words, I got to leave, but just 5 more minutes. And then, I think another 5 minutes I got time for. And then the next thing you know, I think I got 5 more minutes. The next thing you know, I had to be home in about 5 minutes, regardless of where home was and how far away it was. And of course, I would try to make up the time in my car. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Now, with our kids, just be there, start leaving home for that. And now the truth is we do that. We push up to the edge of things a bit, whether it's one more drink, one more bite, one more sleeve of cookies, one more charge, whatever it is, we tend to add on, much like we did when we were trying to figure out whether it's time to come home. The thing of it is, it gets our life so complicated and so complex and so stressed that barely does adding on in that way add value, but rather it takes away and adds stress. Now, a similar dynamic to figuring out how close to the line we could get is, now I don't do this, but I've ridden with you guys, and I know you do it, but you're driving along and the speed limit's 70, and you try to figure out how fast you can go without initiating a conversation with the constabulary. So, 74, maybe it's 81. And so we push the limit. And it's in our human nature to just, now there are people who drive the speed limit. I have good research to show that that's a genetic flaw, but most of us push the limits, and we push the limits in most areas. How far can I go and still not be in trouble? And usually the line that we draw is this the edge before I go into irresponsibility? Is this as close as I can go before disaster strikes or embarrassment, or before I get expelled, or before I get fired, or before I get kicked out of my own house? Is this where the edge is? And we sometimes, people who do this, flirt with an incessant edge of disaster, and this pushing it to the limit impedes our ability to make good decisions. The assumption is that we're so comfortable living, dating, spending, eating, drinking, driving on the edge of embarrassment that that's kind of where we live. We tend to take it to the edge, especially those who are type A's tend to do that. But for the sake of clarity, I would like to add a contrasting viewpoint. The assumption is, we have a decision to make, and it's not wrong. It's all right. It's not illegal. It must be permissible. In other words, if it's not wrong, it must be all right to do. If it's not illegal, it must be permissible. If it's not immoral, it must be acceptable. In other words, if it's not over that line, then it's fine. And so the problem with this way of thinking is that if we saw somebody else do it, we would immediately know there's a problem in the making here. If you're a parent and you see your kids on the line and pushing the line and on the edge of the line, you know that it's not long until there's going to be a problem. And when we push it to the line, if it's not illegal, it must be permissible, all that stuff. What we're asking is, how do I live my life with the lowest common denominator? How low can I go before I suffer consequences? Or as a pastor, you get asked quite often, or if you're a religious person, if I do this, is it sinning? In other words, how close can I get to sinning without it being called a sin? And that leads to another question that inevitably comes is, how far over the line can I go without getting caught? Or how far over the line can I go and still stay free of consequences, you know? Can I take another business trip when my wife knows she wants me home? Can I spend just one more purchase? How long can I neglect my health without feeling the effects? How long can I indulge in this behavior? And it's a slippery slope. And it all begins because we're asking the wrong question. Now, the point of what we're doing for the last 3 weeks, and today's the 4th week, next week will be the 5th week, is we are learning the fact that good outcomes come from good questions. And lack of regrets come from asking the questions beforehand, not after the fact. And so if we can discipline ourselves to answer these questions we're talking about each week, and then if we can answer them honestly, and then act on the answers, we will live a life of fewer regrets. The problem with pushing it to the edge all the time is there's no margin for error. We are on the edge already. Now, there's a better question that we should be asking that will ensure better decisions. And again, if we answer it honestly, it will lead to fewer regrets. So the big idea is, we often overlook the fact that good decisions come from good questions, and good questions set us up for better decisions. And in fact, our decisions are not much better than our questions. They're that closely linked. So let's look at another question this morning. Now, the first week, we looked at the integrity question, which is, am I being honest with myself? And when we want something, and we want to do something, we are often less than honest with ourselves. Oh, it won't matter. Okay. And we have this salesman in our head who tries to convince us of doing what we really wanted to do all along. So the question is, am I being honest with myself? Really? Second question was the legacy question, which is, what story do I want my life to tell? We're in the process of writing our life story right now, every day. So what story do I want to tell about me relationally, financially, or professionally? What story do I want others to tell? Because I'm weaving the pattern of the story for my life right now. And the good part is, you get to decide. You are deciding every day what your story will be. The third question, which was last week, was the question of conscience. In other words, is there a tension in here? It's not illegal. It must be okay. It's fine. And everybody's nodding their head. Sure, it's not a problem. But inside of us, there's this quiet voice going on. Those who walk with the Spirit of God, we sometimes feel what's called a spiritual check. In other words, God gives us a little ding from deep inside. So the question last week was, is there a tension that needs my attention? And that should be looked at. And many times when we look at our decisions that got us into trouble, we blew past the yield and warning signs and didn't pay attention. So today, question 4 is the maturity question. And it's a maturity question because really it takes a certain amount of sociological and developmental maturity to deal with this question. And if we refuse to ask the question, then it takes us back to where we initially came in. And if you're looking at your insert, it is the first scripture there in red, and it says, the prudent see danger. The wise people, intelligent people, see danger, and they take refuge. But the simple keep going, and they pay the penalty. In other words, wise people connect the dots and can see where this is going. If this continues on this direction, there's going to be a problem. Whereas foolish people, they don't bother, they just keep going, and the next thing you know, they run into a very solid wall at a very high rate of speed. So the maturity question for this week is this the wise thing to do? We're not talking about everybody else is doing it. We're not talking about it's not illegal, so it must be okay. It's not immoral, so it must be fine. It's not. We're talking about a whole new level of a question. And the question is this the wise thing to do? Mature people recognize and understand and accept the fact that a decision can be both not wrong and unwise at the same time. Not talking right and wrong. We're talking, is this wise? It's not talking illegal. We're just talking unwise. And when we look at the questions that got us into big trouble, sometimes we will find at one level there was nothing wrong with it. It just wasn't wise. And we've regretted that decision ever since. So in order to avoid the 5 more minute syndrome and create a moral and ethical and erase our financial margins and all the rest of it, the question this morning is this the wise thing to do? The Apostle Paul spells this out a bit when he's writing to the church at Ephesus. And if you follow along there at verse 15, he says, be careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. In other words, he's kind of reflecting that verse we looked at on the first Sunday, which is, be one of the wise people that connects the dots and decides ahead of time, is this the wise thing to do? Be careful, because this is a evil time. And so here, I think that a lot of things have changed from the first century till now, but our human nature hasn't much changed. And so he's saying, not is it legal or illegal, is it right or wrong? He's saying, make wise decisions. And then he says, be careful how you live, make the most of every opportunity. That phrase in the original, the words that he used were redeem or ransom your time. Make your time valuable. Make the most out of your time. And if you look back at the decisions you've made, if you could have the wasted time, the wasted money, wasted energy from bad decisions, excuse me, you'd be in a lot better place. I'm thinking of, I was walking the other day and with the dog, and this guy blew by me in his Mustang, which I was admiring. But anyways, he was ripping through the gears, and it was chirping his tires in every gear, and it was an amazing display of power. But I was thinking at the same time, if I had back all the money that I spent on my muscle car and the money I may have or may not have paid in fines, you had to get your engine blueprinted and balanced, and I was burning up a set of tires every month, and the transmission wouldn't hold the strain, so I had to get it rebuilt often, and the rear end, I was just chewing through gears like crazy. The cost, if I had that money now, if I'd have invested it then, I'd be retired a multimillionaire. All I had to do was not do that, but do this. And I'd have been a rich man. Paul is saying, redeem the time. Make the most of your time. Make your time work for you. But be wise and make the decision beforehand. Don't get, 45 now? Don't wait till you're 45 and look back and say, if I had, then it would be better. Now, he says something interesting, and he says, you have to do this. Why? because the days are evil. And what does he mean? Well, we've talked a little bit about this before, but you're not going to get help from this culture. The guy who's selling the car never says, don't make a decision now. Go home. Think about it. Call me tomorrow. No. He'll jump you, wrestle you to the floor, bend your arm, buy it now. Make the decision while you're excited. We find that this culture has a plan for your life. A few years ago, we talked about, when I was a little closer to the car industry I am now, Ford came out with the red carpet lease. And they told you this was the greatest thing since sliced bread. You could have a brand new car and only pay for half of it. Turns out, over the long run, it is absolutely the most expensive way to own a car. But Ford had just signed a very expensive contract, and they needed people to trade their cars in more often than they were. The cars were going out 5 to 7 years, and people were hanging on to them and driving them. Why? Because it's cheaper. They needed you to give them your money so they could pay their contract. Are you tracking with me? Everybody has a plan for your life. And so they come up with the red carpet lease, and sure enough, it cut the time in half where people would keep their time and keep their vehicles, and they bought more vehicles. And if you read the profit statements of Ford, you can thank yourself very much. He's saying this culture isn't going to help you make wise decisions. If you're going to make wise decisions, you are going to have to make them. Nobody's going to help you. You have to be an independent thinker who's wise and who looks at what the future brings. So, why is the fourth question, practically speaking, one of the better questions? And so let's break it down a bit. When it says, what is the wisest thing to do? If you're to break it down, in light of my past, what's the wisest thing to do? In light of my present circumstances, what's the wisest thing to do? And in light of the future, what's the wisest thing to do? Now, in the past, the saying is, those who can't remember their past are condemned to repeat it. A more awkward phrase of that would be, those who don't pay attention what got them into trouble yesterday are liable to end up in the same trouble today. In other words, we have certain propensities for certain behaviors that gets us into trouble, and it's unique to us. And for me, my past, I know, I'm trying to lose some weight, but I know that if you have in front of me cake with chocolate icing on it, I'm going to eat it, okay? And the problem with that is you get a birthday, and it's delicious chocolate cake. And I found out from my uncle, if you put in a cereal bowl and put milk on it and eat it, it's just tremendous. You can eat 5 pieces of cake. And you're not going to do it, but I know from my past, if it's there, I'm going to eat. So and then somebody else has a birthday. Aaron has a birthday. Right now in my fridge at home is a chocolate cake with icing that thick, with chocolate icing. I have a particular propensity to eat the cake today because I can always start my diet again tomorrow. You just get the birthdays, and then someone retires. What is that all about? And what do they have for their retirement cake? Chocolate icing that thick. By the way, David, thank you for so many years here of helping me. David was an accountant, and he is retiring this week. And yeah. And Betty, who's been a volunteer in the office, she's going with him. They're going up north. I told her, he's not worth it to stay here and work with us, but oh no, she's going up with him. But
how big is the cake?
That cake is gone. I did that myself. I'm very diligent in that kind of thing. So thanks, David, and congratulations. Now, so I know my propensity is if you have food around me within arm's length, it goes in my mouth. Pasta and especially candy. I have this deal about candy. It's not an addiction. I just have to have it all the time. So in view of my past, is buying a bowl of candies and putting it on my coffee table a wise decision? Yes, if you want to weigh 300 pounds. No, if the long-term goal is to lose weight. You tracking with me? In light of your past and your history, what's wise? Currently, is this a wise decision? You just got out of a relationship, you step into another. Is that a wise thing at this time, considering how you're doing? You're exhausted and tired and discouraged, and you're making long-term plans from a point of discouragement. Henry Ford said that fatigue makes cowards of us all. When you're tired, you're going to make bad decisions. Best thing to do is delay it. And life comes in seasons. Sometimes it's going good, and you're on top of it, and you're going to win at everything you try, and you know it, and you're going to make good decisions. But now, in light of where you are at this moment, is this a good decision? Is it a wise decision? So in light of my past, you need to make wise decisions. In light of your future, in light of your current circumstances, and it comes and goes. I mean, sometimes we're having good times, sometimes we're having bad times. Just take a thermometer of where you are right now and what decisions you're making. I find very often people make long-term changes to correct a short-term problem. And so do inventory in light of my long-term goals and my past. Is this what I want? So that's our next section is, in light of my long-term objectives, is this a wise decision? Is this a wise decision financially, professionally, relationally? If my long-term goal is to wind up retired and wrinkled with a pair of white pants and a red belt pulled up around my armpits and complain about the government and sit on my porch, is this a wise decision that I'm making in view of my long-term decisions? Is this wise if I'm trying to get ready to retire? Is it wise to buy, first service, I said, a $70,000 diesel truck with 10 axles to pull a house trailer? Then I found out they're $80,000. Is it wise at this close to retirement, whenever that is, if I can sneak it in before the second coming of Jesus, I'd like a few weeks. We had a Marine friend of mine. He said his retirement plan was he was going to have to work right up until noon the day Jesus came back. So it's kind of looking like mine. But in light of my goals in the future to retire, is this financial decision wise? Is this a professional decision wise? Is this a relational decision wise? And we make excuses, and especially that salesman in our head will tell us all sorts of reasons that why we should do something right now. And these excuses, we said that if someone else said them to you, you would not accept them. You would say, that's crazy. But when we want something, we can talk ourselves into almost anything. Our excuses are persuasive because sometimes there's some of it that is true. You aren't doing anything wrong. You can handle it. It's not illegal. But the fourth question isn't to stop you from doing something wrong. The fourth question is just to stop you from doing something unwise. And that's a big difference. Those excuses that you make open the door to go through for bad outcomes, disappointments, and regrets. And if you learn over time to silence your conscience, it will cloud your reasoning and diminish your ability to hear the voices of wisdom around you. So often we make decisions and people told us ahead of time. I told you about marrying her. You're into this a couple of years now. Was I right? No. Okay. I just thought I warned you, but you look so happy it makes me sick. Anyways, when we made bad decisions, quite often people around us warned us about that. But we get these voices in our own head where we can't even recognize wisdom when it's given to us. We get into such a frame of mind. So in light of what you ultimately want, relationally, romantically, financially, is this the wisest conduct right now in your relationship? Here's the point. We are all going to get somewhere with our life. We're all going to get somewhere. The objective is to get where we want to get and where we should be, where we need to be. If you live your life unguided and unguarded and uncontrolled, you're going to get somewhere. That's just the way life is. But if we ask these 5 questions, last one's next week, if we ask these 5 questions and we answer them honestly and then we act on our answers, where we get to will be the best possible place. Jesus said, I've come to teach you how to live the abundant life. And all of the raw material in our owner's manual here teaches us how to live the very best life possible. And in this teaching from the manual, it's teaching us to ask good questions because good questions prevent a life of regrets. And we have those because we didn't really follow a careful process for decision making. You are a unique blend of your past experiences, your current circumstances where you are, but also you have a unique vision of hopes, dreams, and aspirations. And it's only if you will ask strategic questions and answer them honestly, can you live and receive out of life what's best possible for you. So what's the wise thing for me to do right now in light of my past, my present, and my future aspirations? That's the question to ask yourself, and it brings the best outcomes for you and those around you. Why? Because you're not the only one that suffers the consequences of your stupid decisions. My wife is always telling me to make better decisions. I don't know what that's about, but those around you are not the also suffer with your regrets. So as we live our life, these questions give us the best outcomes. Amen? Let's stand together.